my videos. This one is for dividing using the standard algorithm for numbers with and without decimals. For all of these, what I'd like you to do is to make an estimate before you try using the standard algorithm to come up with your answer. That'll give you an idea with the decimals where to place the decimals, and also give you an idea if you make a mistake of being able to identify whether or not you've made a mistake. So always use estimation with these to come up with the reasonableness of your answer. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of these as we get going here. So let's look at this first one here. So let's make an estimate of this first one. So if we look at our first one, we would end up with, good estimate would be like 3,000 divided by 2. So that's just saying what's half of 3,000. And that's something you should be able to do. Half of 3,000, it would be 15,000, or 1,500 would be half of 3,000. So we know our answer is going to be somewhere around 1,500 because we're taking 3,000, number close to 3,000 and dividing it by 2. So let's just walk through our standard algorithm. So our first thing is how many times does 2 go into 3? And it goes into 3 one time. So we put our 1 up here. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 down here, and then we subtract that down. So 3 minus 2 is 1. And then we drop down our next number. Okay? And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 2 go into 12? And that happens to go into it 6 times. And 2 times 6 is 12. And subtract that down. 0. We drop down our next number, which is 1. How many times does 2 go into 1? It does not go into 1 at all. So 0 times 2 is 0. Subtract that down. 1 minus 0 is 1. And then we bring down our last number here is 6. And then ask ourselves how many times does 2 go into 16, and that is 8. So 2 times 8 is 16. Write that down. We end up with 0 there. Okay. So we end up with 1,608, which is fairly close to 1,500, which is what we said our estimate would be. So that is one way to kind of figure out this and see where you're at with these, okay? So let's go on to this next one here. Make your estimates fairly easy. So one thing I would do with one like this one, I would just say, let's say if that was 17,000, how many times does 17 go into that? So we're going to take 17,000 divided by 17, and that would be 100. So we know our answer is going to be close to 100. Okay, so we know our answer is going to be close to 100. So then we start working through it. How many times does 17 go into 1? Does not go into 1. Some people put a place value, an X up here. I just leave it blank, but whatever you want to do, if you want to put something there. So then I ask myself, how many times 17 go into 19? It will go into it 1 time. So 1 times 17 is 17. Subtract that down. And 9 minus 7 is 2. And 1 minus 1 is 0. So that ends up with just 2. Bring down our 5. And we need to know how many times does 17 go into 25. And it's just going to go into that 1 time also. So 1 times 17 is 17. So we're going to minus 17 from 25. We'd have to borrow there. And 15 minus 7 would give us 8. 0. So now we need to bring down our last 5 here. So how many times does 17 go into 85? When I'm trying to figure out one of these, I know if it's going to go in there evenly, Probably my best shot would be 5, because I know 5 times 7 would give me something that ends with a 5, and that would be 35, plus 5 times 10 would be 50, so that does end up being 85. So 5 times 17 is 85. Subtract that down, and we end up with 0. So my answer is 115. So use what you know about multiplication. If we know it has to end with a 5, we know it's going to most likely be a 5. It's going to go in there evenly. Now, if it doesn't have to go in there evenly, we'll see on some of these other ones what you can do. Sometimes you can keep dividing. We're going to talk about that on the next one. And sometimes you can leave with a remainder. If you can, I want you to keep dividing. We'll look at that on this next one. So let's go ahead and look at this next one here. Try these on your own first before you watch the video. See if you can get these on your own. But let's look at this next one here. Okay, so this next one we have here, what would be a good estimate? I would say something like, just something again I can do quick in my head. Maybe 300 divided by 2. If you're dividing something by 2, that's pretty easy. So half of 300 would be 150. So I know my answer is going to be close to 150. So we're going to work that out that way. We know our answer is going to be close to 150. How many times does 2 go into 3? It goes into that 1 time. So 1 times 2 is 2. Subtract that down. And now we bring our 3 down. And so how many times is 2 going to 13? That's going to be 6 times. So 6 times 2 is 12. Subtract that down. We end up with, that's going to be 1 there. Bring down our 8 there. And that will be 18. Okay. How many times does 2 go into 18? That is actually 9, isn't it? So 2 goes into 18. That would be, 9 times. 9 times 2 is 18. That goes into it. 0. Bring down our 9. And so how many times is 2 going to 9? It goes into it 4 times. So 2 times 4 is 8. And subtract that down. We end up with a 1. Now you might have stopped here before and said, oh, I have a remainder of 1. But what we're going to do is we're going to at least try again. We can place a 0 here because it's after the decimal. We could keep going if we want to, because it doesn't change the value if we just put zeros out here. We could keep putting zeros as long as we wanted to out here. So I could bring down that 0, place it here. How many times does 2 go into 10? 2 goes into 10 5 times. 5 times 2 is 10. And that goes in exactly, so we don't have anything left. So then we ask ourselves, where would my decimal go? We know the answer's got to be close to 150, so where could we put my decimal to get it close to 150? If we put it there, 16 is not close to 150. If we put it there, that's about as close to 150 as we can get it. And notice, it lines up right above that decimal. Now, that's not always the case. It will be the case if you don't have any decimals out front. But if you have decimals out front, it will not always be the case. So, but in this case, it lines up there. That's the only place to put it. If we put it anywhere else, it wouldn't be close to our estimate of 150. So that's where your estimate is important. Okay, so let's move on to this next one here. Let's go ahead and come up with an estimate on this one. I don't know. This one's not that easy of a one to estimate, so let's go with something maybe we can do easily. Let's go with maybe that's close to 900. And if we go this, we could round it up to maybe 20. 20 is fairly easy because again we know that half of 9, again half of 9 is 4.5, so half of 90 would be 45. So that means half of, since we're dividing it by 20, so that would just be 45. Okay, so we know our answer has to be close to 45. So now we got to make sure we put this in correctly too, because it doesn't have it lined out in our division bar. Remember, the one we're dividing by, which is the 16, goes out front, and the one we're dividing goes underneath. Okay, so 9, 3, 4. You can either put the decimal in or not, depending on whether you want to. It doesn't really matter. And then you got to divide these out. So how many times does 16 go into 93? You just mess around with it. I know it's going to go, I know I would always start with something like 5. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 5 plus 50. That would give me 80. That's as close as it's going to go in there, isn't it? So it's going to go in there 5 times, and that would end up being 80, wouldn't it? 80. So we minus that down. Okay, so that would be 101, 3, bring down my 4. So how many times is 16 going 134? If it was 10 times, it'd be 160. We're basically, I know that we're basically 2 16s off of that, so I would probably imagine 8 would be a good estimate. And let's do our work over here. 16 times 8. I know 6 times 8 is 48. Put down 8, carry the 4, 8 plus 4 is 12. So 100 and, so it'd be 8. Yeah, that's as close as we're going to get, isn't it? So we end up with 8, 128. Subtract that down. I need to borrow here. So 8 goes into 14. That would be 4 times, or sorry, 6 times. I messed up. So that should be a 6 there. Six. Bring down my 4. And I know that 16 times 2 is 32, so that means 16 times 4 would be 64. So times it by 4 would be 64. Minus that, we end up with 0 when we minus that down. So we said our answer would be close to 45. The closest we can get to 45 would be 58. And notice that's right above our decimal there again. And again, we didn't have any decimals out front, so we could get that there. But that's the closest, because 5.84 or 584 is not close to 45. The closest we can get to 45 is 58. So that's where our decimal ends up going.